Hey guys, welcome back from your holiday weekend. Hope everybody is well and feeling good. So the next thing that we are going to dive into, talking about African nationalism, is unfortunately one of the negative consequences of the independence movements that we find in Africa, and that unfortunately is going to be genocide. So guys, what genocide is essentially the systematic killing of a group of people. For whatever difference that they have, that difference is what's being targeted and isolating them as the group that is really being persecuted against. Now, we've seen genocide throughout history, so it's not something that's unique just to Africa in the 1900s. But unfortunately, what we see is that it starts to take effect and it happens more and more in Africa after the independence movements occurred in the 1940s, 1950s, and 1960s. So, as we can see throughout history, genocides have taken place in Africa, the Middle East, Russia, Europe, China. Genocide is something that's not just unique to Africa, but it has been happening to different places throughout the world based upon the essentially desires of either a group or a leader. In the Congo, for example, during the age of imperialism, the Belgians, led by King Leopold, were murdering Africans at record numbers simply as a way to solidify their power and still continue to exploit Africa for raw materials and natural resources. So that genocide was purely for Belgian gain, both economically and to show social superiority. In the Middle East, there was a group of relatively independent Christians called the Armenians living in the outskirts of modern day Turkey. Now, for the most part, the Armenians were permitted to practice Christianity with no problems from the Ottoman government. Remember, the Ottoman government at this time was Islamic, but the Islamic Empire throughout history had always been very tolerant to different religions, and the Armenians simply just had to pay an additional tax, which again was common throughout history, but they were not persecuted for their religious beliefs. But after World War I and the Ottoman Empire lost, the Armenian Christians were targeted. They were called traitors. People worried if they were spies. They worried if the Armenian Christians had conspired against the Ottoman Empire to help the European countries, which were predominantly Christian, to be successful in World War I. As a result, we see millions of Armenians that are either driven from their homes, or we see millions of Armenians that were murdered, men, women, and children. The next genocide that we look at happened between the Ukrainians and the Russians. So remember, the leader of Russia during this time period was Joseph Stalin. And if we remember anything about Joseph Stalin, he was a totalitarian dictator. The man wanted complete control. He didn't trust anybody. And if you went against him in any way, shape, or form, you were simply killed. So what happened is that when Russia tried to up the grain quotas, the peasants couldn't feed themselves. So the Ukrainians protested against Stalin and his actions, and Stalin then went in and killed 10 million people. Stalin was also okay with this for a couple of reasons. It helped to solidify his power, again, showing that you don't mess with Stalin. It eliminated anyone who would oppose him, again, helping him politically. And also the fact that the Ukrainians were not technically Russian, it made it a little bit easier to justify his actions. The next genocide, and probably most popular genocide, which is really sad to say that there's a most popular genocide, but I guess the most well-known genocide is that of the Holocaust. We spent a great deal of time with this when we were talking about World War II, when Hitler and the Nazi Party systematically tried to eliminate all of the Jews in Europe, which when you look at the numbers, between 6 to 8 million Jews that they killed during this time period, it goes down as one of the worst genocides that the world has ever seen. And remember, that simply the reason why this happened is that Hitler targeted the Jews, blaming a lot of the misfortune that happened on Germany during the 1920s and 1930s on the Jewish people. But nonetheless, the Jews were targeted because of their religious beliefs. So I'm not 100% sure if Mao technically falls under the category of being a genocidal murderer. We do know that Mao killed tens of millions of people during his Cultural Revolution and different purges. But it's questionable because he was killing other Chinese citizens. But nonetheless, if we're talking about genocide and we're talking about murdering maniacs, I definitely feel that Mao deserves to be in here. Remember, he targeted the elite, he targeted the intellectuals. So perhaps that's the grouping that we could identify for that to call this a genocide. But either way, Mao still belongs in this category. So you have to remember, after the Holocaust and after World War II came to an end, and we had the Nuremberg trials, the big thing was the world did not want to allow genocides to happen again. They saw what happened to the Jewish people. A lot of people were questioning, how did this happen? How was it allowed? How didn't we know? So the United Nations really made it a big effort to make sure that human rights violations were not going to happen. Unfortunately, what we can see, and you'll look at the slide, is that there are going to be numerous genocide events that happen after World War II, and the UN is either unable to stop it or unaware of what's going on. The genocide that happened in Cambodia is a genocide that we don't hear very often discussed simply because, well, a lot of people don't even know where Cambodia is. Guys, if you're looking on a map, it's in Southeast Asia. So what happened was during the spread of communism, like remember the domino theory and everybody being nervous that one country would become communist and then it would happen. Well, Cambodia became communist, and their leader was a guy by the name of Pol Pot. And Pol Pot, his party, the Communist Party, was known as the Khmer Rouge. And what the Khmer Rouge did was systematically eliminate anybody that was opposing the Communist Party. They were brutal. The percentage of people that they killed was incredibly high. The way that they went about the killings was pretty disgusting. You're going to see, I'm going to post a video up there on Google Classroom that I want you guys to watch. It's only about a 5-minute video, but it's going to walk you through what happened with Pol Pot and the Khmer Rouge, and you're going to really be kind of disgusted by it, but it's something that you should hear and something that you should watch. So a dictator that we might know a little bit more about is Saddam Hussein. So Saddam Hussein was notorious for using poison gas against his opposition, whether it was political opposition or, for the example that we're talking about right now, there was a group of Muslims that were living in northern Iraq called the Kurds. The Kurds, for the most part, had always been relatively independent, and Saddam Hussein was really nervous about kind of the sovereignty that they had. Well, what he did is that he ordered his brother to essentially murder the Kurds, and it ended up taking out, as you can see by the numbers, hundreds of thousands to millions of Kurdish Iraqis. So probably one of the most famous genocides of the 20th century was the genocide that took place in Rwanda. So Rwanda is a country in Africa, and what happened was Rwanda fell into the same kind of circumstance that Congo did. That for much of the late 1800s and early 1900s, Rwanda was under the control of foreign nations. But when the Europeans left Africa after World War II, we talked about already that the African countries were now able to gain their independence. Well, in Rwanda, what happened was that there was two ethnic tribes, the Hutus and the Tutsis. So the Hutus were the majority, and the Tutsis were the minority groups, or the minority tribe. During imperialism, the Tutsis were treated really well. Their skin was a little bit lighter. They had a little bit more European features. Noses were a little smaller. They were a little bit taller. So the Europeans gave them better jobs. Well, once the Europeans left, now all of a sudden you have this division that existed within the Rwandan world. And what happened was, long story short, the Tutsis were blamed for the assassination of the Rwandan president, who happened to be Hutu. There's a lot of discrepancy that the Hutus actually assassinated the president to start this genocide, to give a reason for this to take place. And what happened, guys, is that in 100 days, there was over 800,000 deaths. Yeah, so let me repeat that. So in 100 days, 800,000 Tutsis were murdered at the hands of the Hutus. This was very much a genocide in every way, shape, and form. Um, the world knew about this. There was film crews that were there. The United Nations knew what was going on, but the United Nations did not want to get involved. And as a result, the Tutsi people were really left trying to survive this. Now, eventually they did, and there's going to be, a Tutsi force that fought back against the Hutus. But guys, for that 100 days, it was really scary. So if we were in class right now, what we would do is we'd be watching the movie Hotel Rwanda. Hotel Rwanda talks about a hotel manager, Paul Rugusabina, who basically hides Tutsis in the hotel and tries to keep them safe against the Hutu militia. Now, obviously, with not being in class, we can't all watch the movie. But I would strongly encourage, if you have Hulu, Hotel Rwanda is there. Again, I'm not mandating this, guys, but if you have access to watch the movie, I know that you guys can find movies way better than I can. I would really, really strongly suggest that you watch Hotel Rwanda. It gives a really interesting look into the genocide through this family and through this man who's doing everything that he possibly can. But when you're done with it, you're gonna cry because it's that sad of a movie. But it's a great movie, and I really, 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 really wish that you guys watch it. Obviously, if you can't, I understand just because of the circumstances that we're in. But if you have access to the movie, or if you can rent it, or download it, or find it, I really, really strongly suggest you guys take 2 hours and watch it. So again, as we talked about during the push of African independence, a major problem that African countries found themselves in was civil wars, fighting between different groups. So what ended up happening is that in the Sudan, in the midst of their civil war, there's going to be this group called the Janjaweed that are again trying to eliminate different tribes. So very similar to what happened in Rwanda is that within the Sudan, there was all of these different tribes living together, and at any given point, one of these tribes could really kind of turn themselves into a militia, just like the Janjaweed did, and they were going to try to eliminate each other. In the Sudan, they were fighting over natural resources, raw material with fertile soil. But nonetheless, the murder stems from trying to get rid of a group or a tribe, specifically because they are different from you. All right, so guys, that was just a brief overview of the different genocides that we have seen throughout the 20th century. Now, also, there are more examples of genocides that we're going to look at as we continue throughout the year. But what I want you guys to focus on for this week is I'm going to put you on a little bit of a project. So what you're going to do is that you're going to research in more detail 3 genocides of the 20th century. Now, you're more than welcome to use any of the genocides that we discussed in this video, or you're welcome to research a genocide on your own. That's absolutely fine. But on Google Classroom, it's going to be very specific into what's expected in the PowerPoint slides. I really want you guys to take your time with this. It's going to be the only thing that you have to do this week. So yeah, if you have any questions or concerns, please don't hesitate to reach out, send me an email. So I hope you guys are doing well. Stay safe. Keep following that social distancing. Things are looking good, so hopefully, if things continue to go that way, we'll be back in school before you know it. All the best, guys. Take care. Bye.